All right, folks, today we're going to talk about the original Westside Barbell Club and its influence on powerlifting, particularly in the 60s. And I actually did have at least part of an article from 2010 Powerlifting USA magazine from Ron Fernando. I went back into my archives of my Powerlifting USA magazines, and yes, indeed, I have that magazine and that article. So this is going to be largely based on that article, but I'm not going to retell the whole article. First of all, it's a really long article, and it has a very interesting title. And the title, a bit odd maybe, but it was Marilyn Monroe, the Rat Pack, Robert De Niro, and the Westside Barbell Club, with Westside Barbell Club all in caps. That was from June of 2010, Powerlifting USA. And Fernando was assisted by none other than Joe DeMarco, who was one of the two original founding members of the original club. The other being Bill West, also known as William Weiss. It's unfortunate that most folks involved in the iron game, at least those somewhere near my age, know who Bill West was, but have no clue who DeMarco was. Unless, of course, they've read my book on the club, or they have a collection of those old Muscle Builder Power magazines from the 60s and have read them. The title of Ron's article and the crazy stories associated with it reminded me of the many rabbit holes I went down later on with the man that would become later a long-term friend and a key part of me writing my book on the club, and that's Mr. Joe DeMarco, who unfortunately left us a couple of years back, well into his 80s. And so I will not offer, as I said, a full retelling of the article here, but we'll cover some of the pertinent facts that came up in the article, and also from my book and my own experience and conversations with Joe DeMarco. He was really a heck of a guy. He was a machinist by trade, which led him to create some of the equipment back in those days. And in fact, I have a couple myself, which I've done a video about earlier. I also recently posted a video, which was another kind of disappointing one, about John Cole, one of the greatest lifters and strongman ever. And that had George Friend in it, who was one of the more well-known guys that was a key member of the original Westside Club. And what Friend and Cole had in common, besides being two of the strongest cats on the earth in that era, was that they were both Olympian-level track and field guys as well. And Friend was one of several such athletes to work on the strength and power aspect by training with the Culver City crew in their crude yet effective hole-in-the-wall facility on Neosho Street in California back in those days, which became known as the Culver City Westside Barbell Club. It's also notable that despite Bob Hoffman's early hatred of powerlifting and love of O-lifting, as described in that recent video about the start of powerlifting, several really good O-lifters also trained with the Culver City guys, if not all the time, at least occasionally. And even Bill West himself did try his hand at Olympic lifting, and he wasn't bad. He didn't post, world-breaking record numbers, but respectable and decent numbers for somebody that just kind of dabbled in it. He did, and he also did some bodybuilding, but eventually he decided to focus on what was at that time the new sport of powerlifting, and to convince as many of his strong friends as he could to do the same. Now, Dave Ashman, Ike Berger, and Dave Shepard all rubbed elbows with the Muscle Beach crew and the original Westside guys, with Ike in particular being a key member, and you'll see him in a couple of the pictures of the crew. at least when he was there and not in dreary Pennsylvania, dreary and cold Pennsylvania, as Ron called my home state where I currently live. Training at the York Barbell Club, normally, Wood Ike and Dave Shepard and these other guys be a lot of times. And actually, Bill West himself hailed from Pennsylvania as well. And it seems like just the awesome climate and everything about Southern California with its sun, surf, bikini-clad beauties, and some of the best gyms around at the time attracted powerlifters, O-lifters, track and field greats, as much as it did bodybuilders like Arnie and friends. Now, my other book, Great Men, Great Gyms of the Golden Age, describes some of those gyms and Muscle Beach in some detail, one of which is Zoover's, which I obviously have never been there, but it seemed like the Disneyland of gyms and just a really awesome place. A couple of guys that frequented Zoover's also trained at times with Bill West Group. So what were the secrets that the Culver City guys had that were sought out by so many? Well, for starters, and this is kind of strange, they typically trained only twice a week, which was Tuesday night from around 7 till 11, which obviously is a long session, and then another similarly long or even longer session on Saturday, which started typically late morning or noonish, and then just kept on going into the evening. They did their share of cheating style movements, which has always been a controversial subject in the game. But while squatting, deadlifting, and pressing of several varieties were always focused on, innovative ways of handling ever heavier weights became the mother of invention for the crew. And now even there, they borrowed from some folks that came before them, like, for example, the bench or box squat, that so captured Roger Estep and eventually then Louis Simmons. DeMarco got that idea when he lived in Minnesota before he moved to warmer climes, and he trained at Alan Steffen's gym. And Alan Steffen was quite a well-known bodybuilder and a strong guy. And he saw somebody at Alan's gym squatting to a bench to make it a little bit easier than going down the full parallel. So that's where he got that idea from. Now, of course, the club expanded on the idea, again, with Joe being the mechanically inclined and machine shop owner that he was. He created an adjustable squat bench, and they trained at different heights that could render the squat either easier or harder. And he even kept track of, for all the key guys, what their records of. And I even have, I'll show you here, a picture of a note right from DeMarco from back in those times with the different things that they did and what their current maxes were in the squat. So pretty interesting stuff. Another method that they got from the great deadlifter Bob Peoples was the hopper deadlift, where they would use like a rubberized platform, which is, again, something they custom built, to bounce heavy weights off of so they could do reps with monstrous poundage. And then they also did what they called high deadlifts, where it was just really like rack pulls, except they had these wood and rubber platforms, again, which they custom built for the purpose, and you'll see a picture of at least one here during the video. And they also did deficit deadlifts, where you're standing on a piece of wood or platform of some kind, so that it's making the deadlift harder because you're increasing the range of motion. So just like doing the squat from below parallel or above parallel, they kind of covered their bases with different positions. In a more original effort, they started something that they called pad presses, where, again, you'll see pictures of here. And that's something that Joe continued. In fact, I'll show some pictures of him training with my good friend Jeff Agari, who was the one who introduced me to Joe, and he's known Joe since way back and has trained with him. He has his own gym in California also. And he has his own YouTube site, which he doesn't post to a whole heck of a lot. But, and it's called Punk Weight, interestingly. That's what they used to say when they were training and motivating each other, with heavy weight. And Punk Weight, Anyway, so the pad presses, it did also kind of pay homage to an earlier odd lift, which was called the belly toss, which was back before they ever had benches and stuff. And they would be lying on their back, do a pullover to get the bar in place, and then use their feet to, get in an arch position and bounce the weight off of their belly back to the starting point. And the idea there was to use really heavy weights, like beyond max, allow the bar to come down very quickly, and then use every part of your anatomy, cheating, as much as possible, really, and bounce the weight off the highly required pad or pads and back to the rack. You could alternatively not do all the crazy cheating and just use the pads, doing more of a conventional bench press movement, which was a lot like what later became board presses, although that was more about breaking in a heavy bench shirt. Weider's Muscle Builder and Power magazine ran a series of articles penned mostly by our man Tanny, who was Vic Tanny's brother, and Vic Tanny actually owned several gyms, but one of which was the Dungeon going way back, which is also in my book about the different gyms. And that was an interesting place where a lot of interesting people trained, to say the least. So this series of articles was about all the different methods that the club used. Now, Joe did tell me, he said, some of the stuff in the magazine isn't exactly the way it happened in reality. Some of it was bent a little more to Weider trying to sell whatever it was at the moment. And I think we should all realize that about what's in these magazines. It's been that way, really for years and years. So Weider's Muscle Builder and Power did run these articles. And also George Friend had his own column on powerlifting in there for quite some time, which was a regular thing back in the 60s. And Friend was a little more educated and articulate in laying out the way they did things, even though he had some kind of weird ways of doing things, which we'll explore later. So many great athletes were influenced by the club that to try and capture it all in this video would be, in my opinion, a great injustice and would be a very, very long video, which is not my typical style. I try to keep them to maybe 10, 12 minutes is a long video for me. So with that said, I think I'm going to close here with the promise of much more to come on these guys, the different guys that trained with them, their methods. We'll dip into some of these articles because I have them all. I actually have most, if not all, of those articles laid out in the book. But we'll get into some of those things. As always, stay tuned